McQuestion, talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future. Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.
You know, here's a brief warning. The subject matter on this program is not for children. Unfortunately, some of it is about children, specifically underage young women who are forced into prostitution and or trafficked to other parts of the country. Smuggling of illegal immigrants will also be discussed, so fasten your seatbelts as we jump right in. Here to assist in understanding the scope of the problem are our starting on my left is Elizabeth Wheaton. She's an economist and senior lecturer at SMU. She does research on child labor and human trafficking and consults with nonprofit organizations. Beth, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Sitting next to you is Kristen Richards. She's Director of Volunteers for Traffic 911, a nonprofit organization that focuses on the prevention, intervention, rescue, and restoration of domestic minor sex traffic. Kristen, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
And sitting next to you is Sean McGraw. He's Supervisory Special Agent with Homeland Security Investigations. And Sean, I noticed in your background that you've done all kinds of law enforcement in China, Islamabad, and Moscow, as well as other places, right?
Yes, sir.
Have you come home now? Are you safe now or not?
Yep, this should be home for us for good, yes.
Okay, good. Well, we're glad to have you here, but those experiences will stay with you, obviously, your entire life.
Yes, sir, thank you.
Thank you for being here. And finally, Rebecca is a survivor, public speaker, victim advocate, and a full-time student mom. Rebecca, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
That person watching this program does not know you, and they don't know your story, but after the next few minutes, they will. Tell us about it.
I'm actually from Texas, the youngest of 6 children, raised in a Christian Baptist home. From the outside, all the appearances of a very normal family life. I started to have a fiercely independent through my teen years and started to rebel a little bit. I had experimented with drugs, and through a series of events, I left my home at the age of 16, and my parents tried to force me to go into a all-Christian girls' home, and they thought that maybe that would help since they had no idea what to do with me at that point. And from that girls' home, I wound up essentially working the system, and because it was like prison, it was basically jail for a child. And after 6 months there, I found the first chance I had to escape, and that's exactly what I did. And I ran, and I never looked back. And at that moment in my life, I cut all ties with my family. I felt like what they had done was the ultimate betrayal and the entrapment of how they got me to that location. So I really felt like I had no family, and I lived like a vagabond. I lived in the streets. Whoever I would meet that day, I would live with that night. And it was only a matter of time until I was introduced into the sex industry after living with several drug dealers who I thought people that were looking out for me, and the business got slow, and so one of the other girls introduced me into dancing while I was still underage. I was only 17 at the time. And from that point, it was maybe about 2 weeks before the first trafficker picked me up out of that strip club. And of course, he didn't tell me he was a trafficker. The only thing I had heard about a pimp before was that they'll beat you and take all your money. And of course, I didn't want that to happen. And this guy, I thought he was cute. And as it was at that time, I decided to go live with him. And it wasn't until the second night, mind you, at this time, I was highly addicted to drugs. When I was sober, I felt abnormal. I felt normal when I was high. And the second night I found out what was going on in that situation, he sent me out with the other girls that were living at that apartment. And it was 3 women and 2 men in a 2-bedroom apartment. And I found myself on Harry Hines Boulevard in the backseat of a car being told at what price I should sell myself for. And I had no idea what to do. Here I am, a 17-year-old girl on Harry Hines. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Dallas area, but it's a pretty scary area, even for an adult, much less a young girl that should have been in high school. And all I could do was just say, screw it. I accepted my fate at that point, and After about 2 months in that situation, I was ready to commit suicide. I didn't know how I was going to leave, but I wanted to get away. And I wound up meeting another gentleman who was I essentially traded for another trafficker with having no idea that I was getting into the same situation. This man was 20 years my elder, and he groomed me for a period of months. He never sent me to work, so I had no idea. And by the end of it, I was with him for 10 years, actually. And I was trafficked all across America. I had already been shown that my only worth was in my sexuality and my body. So it was no far leap for me to then do that for him, since I'd already been in that life. So there was several other people involved in the scenario, and the beginning to the end was when the federal law enforcement came and arrested me. I wound up getting sentenced to 13 months in federal prison, and that was my first step towards freedom. It was the first time I ever had a break from his abuse, physical, dominant control, manipulation tactics that he employed from day one. And that was the first beginning to the road to my freedom.
Wow, what a story. Reconcile with your family now or not?
Yes, actually. Actually, my family stuck by me through the whole prison process, and that repaired our relationships, and they accepted me. They obviously knew something was awry in my life, but they never pushed me, and actually now we have a much better relationship.
Yeah, great. Sean, probably first time you ever heard the story like that, huh?
No, sir, unfortunately it's not. And I've had the honor of meeting Rebecca a while back, and her story is retold in each one of our investigations, or something similar to it. A lot of them involve minor girls in our community right here in Dallas, and some of our cases involve women from foreign countries that are brought over here for this purpose. And it's just a shame that this goes on in our country, and it's a crime perpetrated by men. The Johns, as we know them, we're the #1 consumer of women in the world, and it's a victimization of our girls, our daughters, our sisters. It's a shame.
Yeah, it is. Kristen, Traffic 911 or Traffic 911, I'm not sure what you call it. Tell us what you guys do and why it's important.
Well, we're a nonprofit organization, and we work in prevention, rescue, and restoration of minor domestic. So this is American children under the age of 18. So on the prevention end, we do a lot of awareness training for the general public, and we also educate youth through our youth prevention campaign, Traps of a Trafficker. And we on the rescue and intervention aspect, we have a number of outreaches that we do where we work real closely with, like Sean's group, for example, and other law enforcement. For example, we go into juvenile detention, which is where we're finding about 95% of our victims. And I'll pause there for a moment and just mention that, due to misidentification and ignorance, and just because there's no place to put these children, and sometimes it's just to get these girls out of, and not just girls but boys too, get these children out of the hands of the trafficker. So what happens, they'll end up in jail, and they're being charged with prostitution and other crimes that are related to their captivity or to the influence of the trafficker. And so, and it's such a shame because they're being arrested for prostitution while the traffickers and the Johns are walking free on the streets. So also another outreach that we do is our internet surveillance. We have teams of people that are highly skilled and trained, and they take pictures of missing children, and they're looking for them out on websites that are known to have sex ads for prostitution, children, adults too. And then we have a missing children intervention team that they're another group that take missing children pictures out to known establishments where prostitution is occurring. So they work real closely with the internet surveillance team and very strategic about where they go. So they're not only educating business owners like hotels, motels, truck stops, places like that, but they're also looking for these missing kids. And we've had a number of identifications and arrests and convictions as a result of all these. And last thing I'll mention, we do first responder training. So we're training people who are on the front lines. So they're the people that have jobs where they're seeing these kids, day in and day out. It could be law enforcement, teachers, counselors, medical personnel, among many others. And then on the restoration end, we have a safe home where we're able to put some of these girls and where they're getting very specialized care, holistic healing, and unconditional love and nurturing.
Great. Well, it's a great thing that you're doing. I appreciate that. I want to look at some of these graphics. Let's start with graphic one, because you mentioned your sort of three-prong attack: prevention, which we'd love to see solve the whole problem; rescue and intervention, of course; and then restoration, which are the three things you mentioned. Then let's look at graphic number two. This is a thing that I think, if you don't mind, Kristen, talk to us about this, because this is something that most people may not be really familiar with.
Yes, this is a slide from the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. And basically, under this act, so sex trafficking has to involve force, fraud, or coercion. However, under this law, no proof of that has to occur if the child is a minor. So any child that is being sexually exploited in sex trafficking, which is the exchange of anything of value for a sex act, they're considered a victim every time, no matter if the child acts or pretends like they want to be involved or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. So that's a good law, is
Yes,
it, right?
absolutely.
I mean, we sort of have a tendency to believe these days that everybody's an adult at 12. At least they think they are, especially if they're our kids, right? But it's really not the case.
Exactly.
They don't know that. The size of the problem, graphic number 3, is something that's kind of interesting, because, and I'm hoping that it's not maybe so big as graphic number 3 shows, but let's see this. If you're talking about a $9.8 billion annual industry, 100,000 children forced each year, up to 90% abused in their own home, and that's a major tragedy right there. And this idea of a brief shelf life, I think, Rebecca, you lasted a little longer than the 7 years and that sort of thing, which is good for you. That's all I can say. Beth, let me talk to you about this for a minute, because we talk about size of the problem. You've obviously done a lot of research into the sex trafficking, but it's not just sex trafficking. When we talk about human trafficking on this thing, there are a lot of people who are trafficked in from, let's say, south of here, Mexico and other places like that. Tell us what your research is showing. Tell us why you became an economist and then focused on this whole area, and who are these perpetrators who do this and get away with it?
I can answer all but the law piece, which is the last piece that you talked about. I did my dissertation on child labor, and my co-author is in criminal justice and did his research on prostitution. When you have prostitution and child labor overlap, and you're looking at human trafficking. And so we looked not only at sex trafficking, but at trafficking, labor trafficking as well. My main focus is on children, but we work on labor trafficking as well, of sex trafficking of adults. And so with the economics, a lot of the different fields that looked at the issue of human trafficking are from law enforcement, from culture, different things like this. And as an economist, I look at things and say, well, what's going on with the dollars? If there was no money to be made with human trafficking, would human trafficking exist? And I believe the answer is absolutely not. It would not exist. It is there because there's so much money to be made by trafficking other humans. If people are willing to have the human trafficking, saying they don't know about it, actually not knowing about it, or knowing about it and using those products or services.
Well, you're talking about profit being the motive, and I think in one of your studies it said the revenue per victim on average is $13,000. Is that a right figure? That I remember reading that from one of your studies?
Realize that you're talking about so many different types of human trafficking that to put an actual number to it. So as a researcher, when I look at the numbers, if it is a government reporting a number, you're probably going to see lower numbers. It looks better. If you see a nonprofit reporting numbers, it often could be a higher number because it helps them with the income and it helps them with revenue generation. So you have to be very careful of the numbers. There is not very good data out there to do it. So even though I've done research,
I don't think they file an income tax return and say how many they had right per head, right?
So doing research on the economics of human trafficking has been difficult. We have models out there. We do not have the data to look at those models and do very good economic research.
Let me give you one example. We've had, obviously, in Texas in the last few months, a lot of kids coming from Central America and other places. And we have, obviously, migrants coming over all the time. I've seen numbers in the paper about what they say you're going to put a truckload, you could fit 30 people in a truck I mean, what are the numbers that they usually bandied around about what I've got to pay to get in that truck to get across the border?
Okay, realize that you're talking about two different things. Human trafficking is using force, coercion, and human smuggling is what you're talking about, putting people in a truck and moving them across the border illegally.
Correct.
You must separate the two. We can talk about human smuggling, bringing people across. Not all those people are trafficked. It could be they get into a trafficking situation. But you must take the situation of smuggling and trafficking. They are two separate things.
Separate things.
The economic models are absolutely separate.
Okay, and so as a lot of that trafficking does take place across the border, this one or others, right?
Yes.
And so that's just bringing people who didn't want to come and getting paid by somebody else once they get here, correct?
A lot of that is may start out being smuggled, trying to get to a better economic situation, and when they get to that point, having their papers taken away or being put in a situation where they do not have a say in what they're going to do with their life.
Then it's no longer smuggling, it becomes trafficking.
It
at
could
that
become
time.
trafficking.
All right, let's look at graphic number 4. And since most of this program is seen in Texas, this is the idea of Texas being a hub. Now, Kristen, I think this is one of your slides. You want to tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, so Texas is only number 2 behind California. And if you look at the red line, that's I-10. So the Department of Justice designated that corridor as a number 1 human trafficking route. So that, if you notice, 1/3 of that highway goes right through the middle of our state. And it's also estimated that 1 out of 4 victims is transported across along that corridor as well. And Department of Homeland Security has also designated the area that's between Dallas-Fort Worth, Houston, and San Antonio as the Texas Triangle, basically. And it is comprised of about 39 counties.
All right, let's pull up graphic 5 while you're talking about it, if you don't mind. There it is.
Yes. And so that's an area that across the country, child sex trafficking is one of the most prevalent places in the whole country. So we're really trying to focus in that Texas Triangle with our work and expanding into some of our more juvenile detention programs, et cetera.
Right. Sean, tell us about this, particularly how it happens here.
Well, I run a task force that is comprised of federal, state, and local law enforcement officers. We concentrate on North Texas. That's our area in Dallas. So in Dallas, we have Dallas Police Department and Arlington Police Department and Fort Worth Police Department that they are part of a Department of Justice grant, and together with Department of Public Safety and the Texas Attorney General's Office, we're the main core of the group. FBI also investigates human trafficking. We receive leads from Kristen and her Traffic 911, other non-government organizations, other law enforcement, family members call in. It's a very underreported and unreported crime, probably one of the most unreported crimes that's out there. There's a lot of guilt and shame that goes along with this, that the victims often see themselves as part of the criminal enterprise, and that's what makes it very difficult to convince them that they were victimized and that they need to cooperate with us and help us to prosecute the violators.
Right. Rebecca, one of the things you talk about is there are myths that women should know about. What are they?
Definitely. I think there's a myth in America that what trafficking looks like, and here it's generally the Romeo pimp model of trafficking. It's not like the movie Taken, where so many people believe that you're kidnapped out of your home and then you're sold to the highest bidder. That's not the model here in America that we see.
What is the model?
It would
Just
be
like
the Romeo pimp model generally,
Right, just like
where you
what?
have the vulnerable youth that traffickers then are attracted to them like flies, and they exploit them. They find whatever need that child has, and they sell them a dream, and they learn how to exploit them.
Exactly, thanks. Tammy Long.
Hey, thank you, Dennis. Just like your panel said, people don't realize that this problem doesn't happen in Africa and India. This is our problem now. This is a United States problem. And like Christian said, Texas is number 2, but we are surpassing California because of the I-10 border that stretches from California all the way down to Florida. That's why I started a nonprofit organization called Tahir International, which means freedom, to bring awareness of this human trafficking epidemic that's happening in our backyards today.
So why did you get involved, just very quickly?
I got involved because I've heard about, I worked with a group that was dealing with human trafficking international. And once I heard about this in Slopes 5 years ago, this is happening in our own backyards, I decided to get more involved and to start a nonprofit and to work with law enforcement and our public officials.
Good, thanks a lot. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. Thanks, Tammy. So, Sean, I mean, it looks to me like it should be a really easy thing for you guys. I mean, I can't believe you guys let this go on. Law enforcement shouldn't allow this to happen, huh?
Well, thank you for that question, Dennis. It's not so easy. Number one, we have the challenge with the victim, like I mentioned before. It's not so difficult to find a prostitution situation, but then we have to prove that there was a trafficking incident involved. When we go out, we run a sting operation. We're searching and attempting to rescue a minor, a child that's out there. That's where we dedicate the bulk of our resources to. That's the most egregious area that we think that we can make an impact, and we do. Once you rescue a victim, chances are very likely that victim is going to run away either from home, a shelter, or the foster system and go right back to the trafficker if we cannot arrest them and get them without bond that night. So it's a very difficult thing that we need the community to come together and realize that it's not a law enforcement problem alone. The government can't fix it alone. We need folks from all walks of life that are looking to protect our kids, keep them in school, keep them off the streets. That's the number one denominator of this, runaway children.
Talk to us about what you found in corruption, Beth. What part of this equation does corruption play?
Certainly not an expert on corruption, but you've certainly got, when you've got areas where you've got so much money, and when you've got people who are willing to take money to look away or to make something happen, then you've got problems. So that the law system that's set up, the system with the nonprofit organizations and how they run, the system of rehabilitation, the system of even education, those things, if you've got somebody breaking that by someone in law taking money to turn away. If you've got someone, sometimes we hear teachers or something like that who are involved with the human trafficking ring, things like that. You're trusting that person, you're trusting that to be part of the system that takes away human trafficking, and when that trust is broken, then you can't just follow the mold, here's how we're going to deal with this, but corruption will undermine that, and you've got to find new ways to deal with that corruption.
So you don't know who you can trust. And same problem Rebecca had. The 2 or 3 people you got involved with, you thought they were an answer to where you were to begin with, right?
Right, and I'd just like to speak to one of the major problems in these cases is the failure to self-identify. If you would have, even once I got out of prison, I still went back to my trafficker. He fed me lies every day on the phone after 13 months in federal prison. So you don't realize you're so brainwashed, and you think that person has your best interest at heart when all they're doing is trying to keep you the most profitable that they can. So part of the problems that Mr. McGraw runs into is that the victims don't cooperate with law enforcement, because from day one we were taught how to respond to law enforcement, and that they will come, and that if you don't say anything, they don't know anything, which is unfortunately the truth.
Exactly. I want to look at graphic number 10, Kristen, and I want you to explain to me this, because Sean sort of alluded to it just a minute ago, but the idea of why do they stay, talk to us about some of these points here.
Well, like Rebecca was saying, I mean, there's so much trauma bonds that are formed with the PAMP. You have so many different factors that keep them, you have fear. Fear is probably the biggest one that we have seen. And yeah, they're occasionally they are physically held captive, but most of the time they're held captive here in their minds.
It's psychological.
Psychological, yeah, there's a lot of psychological manipulation and deception and lies and everything that go along with that. And again, like Rebecca said, they'll sell you a dream. So a lot of these children they have a perceived need. And these guys are able to hone in on exactly what it is that the child will need. And so there are a lot of, again, trauma bonds that happen from that. And then sometimes they get the girls pregnant and will use that as a threat, or, you know, I'm going to hurt your child, or I'm going to take your child away from you if you don't stay. So there are many, many, many factors that go along with that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes left, fact, less than that. So give me about 15 or 20 seconds, Beth, and what you'd like that viewer to remember based on your research.
I'd like you to remember that as a researcher, what we don't know, we can't make good laws to deal with a situation if we don't know. And so it's getting an education on what human trafficking actually is, where it exists in your workplace, around your workplace, in your schools, because it is existing there, what you can do about it.
Kristen, give me about 15 seconds.
Well, for us, it's we teach that any child can become a victim. And so a lot of times it's just people think, well, these are just bad kids making bad choices. But we have case after case after case where it's just your average child. Yes, there are certainly children that are higher risk, like the runaways and homeless and that kind of thing. But that's the big component to what we do, is we want to teach people that any child is susceptible to manipulation.
Sean.
Well, the North Texas Trafficking Task Force has had dozens and dozens of cases over the past 4 years. We have yet to have one victim that stayed home and was able to get the help that they need. There needs to be more attention paid to healing these individuals, a safe place to put them and to work with them. Her story is one of very few successes of someone that came out of it and was able to be successful and to move forward in her life.
You have 10 seconds, Rebecca.
I'd like to bring up the involvement of the community with outreaches like We Are Cherished that actually helps those women and doesn't judge them, which allowed me to transform my life, and other reporting apps like Orphan Secure, that you can do something about this.
We appreciate you and what you've been through. So, you know, sometimes this type of situation just seems impossible to believe here in the 21st century, but as you've seen and heard, the situation is very real. There are ways you can help, so if you feel so inclined, please volunteer. Check McQuestionTV.com for additional information, and thanks again for inviting us in to talk about things that matter with people who care.
A DVD of this program is available for $20 plus $5 postage and handling, and in Texas, applicable tax. For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email nikkien@nikkimcquestion.com. Visit our website at www.mcquestiontv.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuestionTV or download McQuestion TV video podcast on iTunes. Production of McQuestion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, CF Accountants and Consultants, adding value to clients throughout the region, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation for the Study and Teaching of the Science of Self-Government, the University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future, Sundown Ranch, one sundown at a time.